What's going on, guys? This is Ed Reviews, here to talk about this very obscure children's show called Lyoko. This show is very near and dear to my heart because I watched this as a kid. I was the target audience for this show when it first started running on Cartoon Network. And I recently, about 10 days ago, found out that all 4 seasons are on Amazon Prime Video. And I immediately wanted to watch it. And I sat down and I watched it. And I didn't go through everything. Full disclosure, I watched about half of season 1, most of season 2, and just this evening I started the 3rd season. But I think I've done enough to at least do an audio editorial and kind of talk about the show, talk about whether or not it's held up, and kind of give a critical analysis looking back on it many years later. So to start, I'll give a little bit of the background, production history, and the synopsis. The show was made by a company called Moonscope that has since went bankrupt. It originates from France. It is a French cartoon. It ran in France, and the English version was imported via Cartoon Network. There was an English version with English dubbing. And I'll start with a little bit of the premise. It centers around these 4 kids who attend a boarding school. And while they're at this boarding school, they discover a nearby factory that houses a supercomputer. And in the supercomputer, there's a virtual world called Lyoko. And within this virtual world, there's an artificial being called Xana, which is the villain of the show. It's some kind of, it doesn't really have a face, but it's the main bad guy. It's a computer program that wants to take over the world. And also on the virtual world, they discover some sort of being called Aelita. She has a virtual avatar. She speaks. She can communicate with them. And at the beginning of the show, they surmise that she's some kind of artificial intelligence. And Xana tries to take over the world by attacking, using these towers on Lyoko to launch some kind of attack in the real world. And our heroes, the 4 kids, have to go into the virtual world as virtual people, fight off some monsters, help Aelita get to the tower, deactivate the tower, and save the world week to week. Sounds complicated? It is. That's basically the setup, at least from the first episode onwards. As it goes on, the show adds a lot in respects to lore, how they found everything, why 11 and 12-year-olds are able to operate supercomputers that were apparently intended for the military. And that's basically the synopsis that I can, as best I can describe it. And I'll start with the style, because I think that a lot of what makes this show cool, at least in the minds of little kids, is its style. For one thing, so there's two styles that are blended together. In the scenes that take place in the everyday real world, it's drawn in 2D animation, done in, weirdly enough, Japanese anime style. If you've ever seen any anime, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, all of that stuff, it's drawn in that style. Again, despite the fact that it is very much a French show. And anytime that the heroes are on Lyoko, it's done in 3D CGI animation. And right off the bat, even looking back on it in 2020, it's a pretty damn cool aesthetic. I'm not going to lie. The virtual world feels really cool. The details are awesome. The monsters look cool. The characters look really cool. And it's just neat to see that blend. I know there were other cartoons earlier in the 90s and stuff that try and play with this concept a little bit. But I think the blend that specifically Code Lyoko uses is really smart, and it's cool because it's split, like, depending on the plot of the episode, but for the most part, it's like half and half. Half the show is in 2D, half the show is in 3D. And, yeah, that's what I can really say about the style. That is my first main point, is stylistically, it's cool. It's bright and colorful, which obviously will help with for the kids of the world to pay attention to it. Definitely helped me pay attention to it. And it's creative. And I guess my next point will be that, like, I'll admit, when I first sat down to watch it, and now towards the end-ish of my rewatch, I think I'm going to keep watching a little more of Season 3 and Season 4, but not the whole thing, because admittedly they're long seasons. I've got school coming up, and I'm admittedly not getting bored with it, but kind of like, okay, I know enough to have thoughts about this thing that was near and dear to my heart as a kid. But it definitely, the first season, I'll say, borders on boring. I was only able to really get through 10 episodes before I kind of wanted to skip ahead, because I remember watching in the first 10 episodes or so of the first season, and I'm like, this is weirder than I remember, and it's not as cool as I remember. But the thing about it was, the first season is very formulaic. Every episode essentially has the same plot of, Xana attacked a tower, and he possessed some kind of device or person that's attacking someone or something. Our heroes have to go into Lyoko and help Aelita, the virtual being, deactivate the tower. And then the world is saved for another week before Xana does it again. And there's one overarching plot point in the first season, and that is that Jeremy, the geek of the group, believes that he can bring Aelita into the real world, and that's the overarching story, is them trying to do that. And at the end of the season, they find out that they succeed and they bring her into the real world. And that season is definitely boring. The second season is where the show definitely found its footing, definitely got a whole lot cooler. I remember skipping into the second season. I think I started with episode 8 of the second season, if you're looking to rewatch the show, which I doubt you are. But if you are, I think I jumped to episode 8 because I recognized the name of a monster that I remember as a kid as part of the plot. And I jumped in and... excuse me. I jumped in and I just kind of said to myself, now this is the show I remember. It gets a lot cooler. It for the most part, drops the formula. I mean, they still kind of follow it, where most of the time there is an activated tower to deactivate. But sometimes they'll drop you into the episode where they're mid-mission, and then you have to deal with the aftermath of the mission. Or there won't even be an activated tower, and they have to go to Lyoko on a research mission. So on and so forth. And I pretty much, I watched from episode 8 to episode 23, I think it was, in the second season. And I was thoroughly entertained. I loved it a lot. And I was just like, this is pretty, pardon my language, pretty fucking awesome for a kid's show. Like, it's always tough to evaluate kids' media, especially when you have a nostalgic connection to it, because, again, in my case, I loved it as a kid, and I was inevitably going to be like, it's really cool if I ever revisited it, and that's kind of what I'm doing. But I'm through this rewatch, I did try and put my mind into, like, try and look at it as if a kid was looking at it, which was tough because admittedly there's a lot of plot inconsistencies I'll get into. But the part of me, the little kid in me, was watching the show and just thinking to myself, like, or at least what I was thinking and trying to look back as to why I liked it as a kid, it has weight to it. I think is one of the key aspects. Even as a kid, you can tell when something has weight. The episodes have stakes. They're people in danger. I think it's one of the earliest instances that I can remember of the concept of dying being in a show. I don't really remember much else that I watched back then, but characters, their lives are on the line a lot. Xana tries to kill people. They try and kill our main characters. And even as a kid, I think you can watch that and on top of it being just really visually cool and like, oh, lasers and cartoons and yay. It definitely, I think it had an ability to grasp not only like the younger kids, but to some degree the older kids. I don't think like high schoolers would watch this or anything, but like kids from, I'd say, like the 5th grade to the 8th grade, I definitely think I could see them sitting down and watching this almost like it was just like their superhero cartoons or things like that. And yeah, that kind of, I guess would sum up like why I think kids would like it, because I think kids enjoyed it at the time because, for one thing, it was super creative, colorful, and I think it had a plot that for a kid would really get you interested, get you excited. And I guess I'll kind of say the things I've noticed that were weirder about the show and a little bit like they're nitpicky in that I know it's meant for kids, and I know that obviously it was written in French originally, but there's just some things I noticed that are kind of plot inconsistencies and some other things. For one thing, the dubbing is, I don't want to say atrocious, but it's really bad. There are moments where mouths stop moving and sound is still coming out. I guess that comes with the territory. I'm not really familiar with a lot of dubbed content, but it definitely like at least watching it again as an adult, I'm like, wait, this doesn't really match. And then my only other point with the audio is there's definitely times where you can see where the writers, I think, had a hard time translating it into English. And I'm not like trying to sound like, oh, you should have written it in English. I get it. And I'm beyond happy that the show exists. And I would love to someday like thank the creators for being a part of my childhood. But there are definitely moments where, like, now looking back on it, I almost chuckle, like, wow, I never noticed that this wasn't an American show. Like, take, for example, there's a scene where one of the characters is waiting for another character to get dressed. And he says, I think the line is, "Geez, a quarter of an hour to get dressed? Why is she taking so long?" And I remember watching that, thinking to myself, like, wait, what's a quarter hour? It's 15 minutes. I'm not good at math. But I remember thinking to myself, like, well, that's the translation. Like, that is just the translations messing up. I'm sure that's probably a saying in French. If I remember correctly, because I took French in high school, when they teach you the concept of like understanding time in French, it might be that, if I remember correctly, like the French think in terms of the quarter hour. So in that respect, I'm just like, oh yeah, that's just the translation. But the partner was like, who talks like this? And maybe I thought that as a kid. Maybe I didn't notice it. Maybe I didn't see that episode. Who knows? And then the other thing I noticed, like trying to be super critical about the show, is that they reuse a lot of small scenes throughout the show. It's very prevalent in the first season, where, again, like I said, it's very formulaic. Every scene of the kids, a lot of the scenes of the kids going to the factory are recycled. The same scenes of them throwing their skateboards on the ground and skating off to it, they're recycled. A lot of the scenes and dialogue of sending the kids onto Lyoko, the virtual world, is reused. And there's a decent amount of scenes that are reused in the 3D segments. The main ones being the scenes when Aelita is deactivating a tower. The same music plays, the same animation of her walking in, floating up to the top of the tower, punching in code Lyoko, and then the tower deactivating. And what I said I was talking to my mother a little bit and some of my friends about this as I've rewatched the show. None of my friends remember the show. By the way, I've been kind of having to bounce the ideas off of people who aren't familiar with it, which has been a little bit difficult, which is why this might be a bit of a rambling mess. But anyway, yeah, I remember that being, at least now as I'm rewatching it, being kind of distracting. And then I'm like, why is this the same scene over and over and over again? But at the same time, I could see why kids would like that. Like, it's familiar week to week. And as I said, as the other seasons go in, they don't necessarily follow that formula, and they don't necessarily need to use the same animations necessarily over and over and over again. But it definitely is a little bit distracting. And yeah, that kind of sums up my thoughts of at least the first two seasons of Code Lyoko, and my thoughts having revisited at least half of the show. As I said, I'm probably going to end up watching the third and fourth season, because to be perfectly honest, I don't remember anything about how the show ends. I'm definitely going to try and watch through the third and fourth season just to see, at the very least for my own curiosity, how the show ends, because I don't really recall a lot of what happened to end the show. I read the synopsis of the final episode, so I can at least know where I know at least now where it ends. But I kind of want to see it play out, because there's aspects I really don't remember. I really only remember bits and pieces of the show, but I remember it being really cool. And I'm definitely, to sum up those words into one thing, I am going to continue watching. But I at least wanted to get this piece out there to at least like see if there's anybody interested in more thoughts that I have, and just kind of describe this little moment in my life, getting to revisit this. It's been a very cool experience rewatching the show. I've had a big smile on my face watching it again, because I remember weekday afternoons sitting down for Code Lyoko every couple of days. And yeah, I definitely recommend, if you watch the show, go rewatch it. It does hold up really well if you watched it. And if anything I said to you piques your interest, check it out. It's on Amazon Prime Video. They're 22 minutes apiece. Take a look. It's a very cool, very creative show that I think it's unfortunate that it didn't have a bigger fan base. But I assure you, those who remember it pretty fondly. And who knows? You might like it. It's fun. It's creative. Check it out. All right, guys. Well, that is my rambly mess audio editorial on Code Lyoko. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment or a like to show me if you guys would be interested in maybe my thoughts on the other 2 seasons, or maybe a longer form video discussing the episodes. Let me know. I'm genuinely curious if anybody would want to hear more about what I think about this show that I watched as a kid.